Sylvester Stallone's head snapped sideways as a right cross connected flush against his jaw, buckling his legs and sending his mouthguard skipping across the gym floor. He grabbed the ropes with both hands, blood already pooling behind his lower lip, while the fighter across from him stalked forward with no intention of letting a movie star walk out on his own 2 feet. What happened in the next 14 minutes would become Los Angeles underground legend, a story whispered about for decades. Stallone threw the first punch, and it landed wrong. His fist connected with the side of a heavy bag that wasn't centered on the chain, and the bag swung sideways, wrenching his shoulder in a direction shoulders aren't supposed to go. He grabbed his arm, stepped back, and the man standing 6 feet behind him laughed. Not a friendly laugh, the kind of laugh that says, "I've been waiting for this." What happened in the next 45 minutes inside that locked Los Angeles gym would become Hollywood legend, a story whispered about for decades by the handful of people who were standing close enough to hear bone hit bone. Let me take you there. It's 1979. Stallone is no longer the broke guy sleeping in bus stations. Rocky came out 3 years earlier and turned him into the most bankable action star on the planet. Rocky 2 is about to drop. Stallone's face is on every magazine, every lunchbox, every poster, and every teenage boy's bedroom in America. And here's the thing. Nobody tells you about Stallone in 1979. He wasn't faking it. The guy trained for real. He could box. Not like a world champion, but he could hold his own against most men alive. He hit hard, he moved well, he had genuine athletic ability, and more importantly, he had the one thing you can't teach. He would not quit. Under any circumstances. Ever. So when a martial arts instructor named Steven Seagal walked into Gold's gym on a Tuesday afternoon and told the room that any boxer, any day of the week, would lose to a trained Aikido practitioner, Stallone didn't ignore it. He set his water bottle down, he turned around, and he said, "You want to test that?" Now let me tell you about Seagal for exactly 3 sentences. He was 30 years old, 6'4", 240 pounds, and he had spent years training in Japan under legitimate Aikido masters. He had a 7th Dan black belt, and he moved with genuine speed for a man his size. And he had a mouth on him that made Ali look modest. Seagal looked at Stallone across that gym floor, and what came out of his mouth next is the reason 11 people got to witness something they'd never forget. Boxing is a limited system. A boxer knows how to do one thing, and that one thing doesn't work against a man who understands redirection and joint manipulation. I could neutralize you without throwing a single punch. Stallone pulled off his wrist wraps slowly. He rolled his neck to the left, then the right. He looked at the guys standing near the weight racks, 4 of them. He looked at the guys by the heavy bags, 3 more. He looked at the 2 trainers near the front desk and the 2 guys who had come in with Seagal. 11 witnesses. "Lock the door," Stallone said. "Believe me, I wish I could tell you this is where somebody stepped in and said, 'Hey fellas, let's cool down.' Nobody did." The door got locked, the gym was closed for the afternoon, and 2 men who had no business fighting each other stepped onto the mat. Here's how the space looked. Gold's Gym in Venice Beach, the original location, the one that smelled permanently of iron and old rubber. The center of the floor had a section of wrestling mats, maybe 20 by 20, laid down for stretching. Around it, weight benches, squat racks, cable machines, all of it pushed back enough to give them room but not enough to give them safety. You fall wrong, you land on a dumbbell rack. You stumble backward, you crack your spine on the edge of a bench press. Seagal stepped onto the mat first. He didn't take a stance. Aikido guys don't, not really. He stood loose, hands open, weight centered, looking like a man waiting for a bus. That's the Aikido thing. You wait. You let the other guy come to you. You use his force against him. Stallone understood this immediately. He'd studied enough fighting to know what Aikido was about. So instead of charging in, he did something smart. He circled, slow, hands up, chin down, feet moving in that lateral shuffle that any boxing trainer would recognize. He wasn't going to give Seagal what Seagal wanted. Get this. For the first 30 seconds, neither man made contact. They just moved. Stallone circling left, Seagal rotating to face him, the 11 men around the edges of that gym absolutely silent. The only sound was shoes on rubber matting and the low hum of the air conditioning unit that barely worked. Then Stallone jabbed. It was fast. Not movie fast, real fast. His left hand shot out and caught Seagal on the chin. Not a power shot, just a rangefinder. The kind of punch that says I can reach you whenever I want. Seagal's head snapped back half an inch. His eyes narrowed. He reset his stance. Stallone jabbed again. Same spot, same speed. This time Seagal tried to redirect it. He reached for Stallone's wrist with his right hand, attempting that classic Aikido grab and turn that looks so beautiful in demonstrations. But Stallone's hand was already gone. That's the problem with trying to grab a boxer's jab. It's not there long enough to catch. Stallone threw a third jab, and this time he doubled it. Jab, jab. The first one Seagal reached for and missed. The second one cracked him on the nose. Seagal blinked hard. His nose started leaking. Not broken, not yet, but the blood was there, a thin red line running down to his upper lip. I swear this happened. One of the guys standing near the weight rack later said that what scared him most wasn't the punch. It was the look on Seagal's face afterward. It wasn't anger, it was confusion. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. In every demonstration, in every dojo, in every controlled scenario, Aikido works beautifully. You grab the wrist, you turn the body, you send the attacker flying. But grabbing the wrist requires the wrist to be there. And Stallone's wasn't. Seagal changed his approach. He stepped forward for the first time, closing the distance, trying to get inside where he could grab an arm, a shoulder, a lapel. But Stallone wasn't wearing a gi. He was wearing a tank top, slick with sweat. There was nothing to grab. Stallone sidestepped, pivoted, and threw a right cross. This one was different. This one had weight behind it. It caught Seagal on the left cheekbone, and the sound was thick, dense, the sound of a fist landing on a face that didn't move out of the way in time. Seagal stumbled sideways. His hip caught the edge of a weight bench. He braced himself with one hand and stayed on his feet. Now here's where it gets interesting. Because Seagal was not a coward, and he was not a small man. He was 4 inches taller than Stallone and had 30 pounds on him. When he straightened up from that weight bench, he didn't look afraid. He looked focused. Whatever casual confidence he'd started with was gone. This was a different Seagal now. He moved in fast, faster than anyone expected from a man that size. He got his left hand on Stallone's right wrist, and he turned his hips for 1 second, maybe 2. He had the leverage. He was pulling Stallone forward, trying to rotate the arm into a lock that would hyperextend the elbow. If he'd completed it, we'd be telling a very different story. But Stallone did something that none of the Aikido textbooks account for. He hit Seagal with his free hand. Left hook, short, compact, delivered from about 8 inches away. It landed on Seagal's ribs right below the armpit. The sound was ugly. Seagal's grip loosened. Not all the way, but enough. Stallone ripped his wrist free, stepped back, and reset. You gotta understand something. In Aikido practice, the attacker commits to the attack. He throws a punch and leaves it out there. He grabs and holds on. He plays by the rules of the exercise. A real fight has no rules. A boxer doesn't leave his hand out for you to grab. A boxer doesn't commit to one motion. A boxer's hands come back as fast as they go out, and while you're trying to redirect one, the other one is already moving toward your liver. Seagal was learning this in real time, and the tuition was painful. Now listen. I need to be fair to Seagal here, because what happened next showed that the man had genuine skill. He adjusted. He stopped trying to grab punches out of the air. Instead, he started using footwork to close distance, and when he got close, he went for clinch positions, underhooks, body locks, places where his size advantage mattered and where Stallone's punching power was neutralized. He got one. A solid body lock, both arms around Stallone's torso, squeezing. He lifted. Stallone's feet came off the mat. For a moment, Stallone was airborne, completely controlled, and Seagal drove him down onto the mat with his full body weight. The impact was violent. Stallone hit the mat back first with 240 pounds of Seagal on top of him. The air left his lungs. You could hear it across the gym, that involuntary exhale when your diaphragm gets compressed and your body forgets how to breathe. The 11 witnesses shifted. 2 of them stepped forward. This was starting to look like it could go wrong in a permanent way. Seagal had Stallone down. He transitioned immediately to a wrist lock, grabbing Stallone's right hand and bending it backward, applying pressure to the joint in a way that was designed to produce compliance through pain, and it worked. Stallone's face twisted, his teeth clenched, his body arched. "Tap," Seagal said. "Tap, and it stops." Here's what nobody tells you about Sylvester Stallone. The man grew up getting beaten by his father. He grew up in foster homes. He grew up in places where quitting meant you were finished, not just for the day, but for good. Pain was not a negotiation tool with Stallone. Pain was a neighborhood he'd lived in his whole life. He didn't tap. Instead, he did something that later got described by one witness as the most animal thing he'd ever seen a human being do. Stallone rolled his entire body toward the wrist lock, not away from it. He rolled into the pain. The pressure on his wrist doubled. Something in the joint popped, not broke, but popped, a ligament stretching past its design tolerance. Stallone's eyes went wide, but his mouth stayed shut. The roll accomplished one thing. It created space. Seagal's body shifted to maintain the lock, and in that shift, his weight moved off Stallone's chest. Stallone got his left hand free, and with that free hand he threw a punch from the ground, a short uppercut that caught Seagal under the jaw. Seagal's head snapped up, his grip on the wrist lock faltered. Stallone ripped free, scrambled backward on the mat, and got to his feet. He was holding his right wrist with his left hand. The wrist was already swelling. He couldn't make a full fist with that hand anymore. One weapon down. And the fight wasn't over. Trust me on this. Any sane human being would have called it there. Bad wrist, bigger opponent, nothing to prove to 11 guys in a gym. But Stallone wasn't operating on logic. He was operating on something deeper, something carved into him in childhood, something that said the moment you quit is the moment you become the person everyone always said you'd be. He put his hands up, both of them, the right one half open because he couldn't close it, and he stepped forward. Seagal wiped his mouth. Blood from his nose had spread to his chin. His jaw was sore from the uppercut. His ribs ached from the hook earlier. He was breathing through his mouth now, which meant the nose was swelling shut. For the first time since the fight started, Seagal looked at the men around the edges of the gym. Just a glance, half a second. But it was enough for Stallone. Stallone closed the distance in 2 steps and threw a left hook that started from his hip. This was not a boxing punch. This was a street punch, the kind of punch that doesn't come from technique. It comes from rage and commitment and the willingness to trade everything you have for one moment of impact. It landed on Seagal's temple. The room went quiet. Seagal's knees buckled. Not a full drop, but a visible sag, the kind of wobble that fighters call getting buzzed. His hands went to his sides. His eyes lost focus for a moment. He was on his feet, but he was somewhere else. Stallone didn't follow up. He stepped back. He watched. His chest was heaving. His right wrist was swollen to the size of a tennis ball. Sweat poured off his face in sheets. And then Seagal did something nobody expected. He straightened up. He took a breath, and he bowed. Not a dramatic bow. Not a theatrical gesture for the audience. A small bow, from the waist, the kind you give to someone who just taught you something you didn't know you needed to learn. Mark this moment. Because this is where the fight should have ended. This is where 2 grown men should have shaken hands and gone their separate ways with a story to tell. This is where wisdom should have entered the room. It didn't. Seagal's bow was real. The respect was genuine, but the competitive animal in him wasn't finished. He came up from that bow and immediately lunged forward, grabbing for Stallone's injured wrist. It was a smart move. Target the weakness. Take the damaged joint and use it as a lever to end the fight. He got the wrist. Stallone hissed through his teeth. The pain must have been extraordinary. Seagal began to rotate, pulling Stallone into a throw. This was textbook Aikido, beautiful in its mechanics, devastating in its application. If it landed clean, Stallone would hit the mat spinning, and Seagal would end up in a control position with the bad wrist locked tight. But Stallone had been in this position before, 3 minutes ago. And the thing about Stallone that made him Stallone, the thing that made Rocky more than a movie, was that he learned. Instead of fighting the throw, he went with it. He let Seagal pull him. He accelerated into the rotation, and as his body spun, he drove his left elbow backward, a spinning elbow strike that was half instinct and half desperation. It caught Seagal in the solar plexus. 240 pounds of Aikido master folded at the waist. The throw collapsed. Both men went to the mat, but this time they went together, tangled, and when they landed, Stallone was on top. He mounted. Full mount, knees on either side of Seagal's torso, weight settled, hips down. And he started hitting. Left hand only because the right one was useless. Short punches, not full power, just enough to keep Seagal's hands busy trying to cover up instead of trying to grab. 1, 2, 3, 4. Seagal covered his face. His forearms absorbed the shots. He tried to buck his hips to throw Stallone off. Stallone rode it. His years of training for Rocky, all those hours in the ring with real fighters, all that sparring with guys who hit back, it paid off right here. He knew how to stay on top. 5, 6, 7. Between the punches, Stallone's face showed something that surprised everyone watching. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't bloodlust. It was sadness. A deep, heavy sadness. He was hitting this man, and he didn't enjoy it. He was proving a point that he wished he didn't have to prove. Seagal's arms dropped. Not unconscious, but done. His body went slack. He turned his head to the side and said, "Enough." Stallone threw one more. Number 8. It was the lightest punch of the sequence, barely a touch, landing on Seagal's shoulder. It was a period at the end of a sentence. Then, Stallone climbed off. He stood up. His right wrist hung limp at his side. His tank top was torn at the collar. His breathing was ragged and wet. He looked down at Seagal, who was still on the mat, chest rising and falling, blood smeared across his face from the nose that had been leaking since the second minute. Here it comes. The line. Stallone looked at him and said, "Don't talk about what you haven't done." 7 words. He didn't explain them. He didn't elaborate. He turned and walked toward the water fountain in the corner of the gym, cradling his damaged wrist against his ribs. If this story is hitting you the way it should, you already know this channel is where legends live. Hit subscribe, hit the bell, because the stories I tell here don't exist anywhere else, and once you're in for good. Now, let me tell you what happened after. Seagal sat up on the mat. He sat there for a long time. The blood on his face was drying. His cheekbone was swelling where the right cross had landed. His ribs hurt when he breathed. His solar plexus felt like it had been kicked by a horse. One of his guys brought him a towel. Seagal pressed it against his nose and breathed through the cotton. Then he did something that not one person in that gym predicted. He stood up, walked across the floor, and extended his hand to Stallone. Stallone looked at the hand. He looked at Seagal's face. Then he reached out with his left hand, because the right one wasn't capable of gripping anything, and they shook. Left hand to right hand, an awkward handshake that lasted exactly 2 seconds. Seagal said, "You're not what I expected." Stallone said, "Nobody ever is." That was it. That was all of it. Seagal gathered his guys and left through the back door. Stallone sat down on a weight bench and let one of the trainers look at his wrist. The trainer said it needed an X-ray. Stallone said it needed ice in 24 hours. He was wrong. It needed 6 weeks in a brace. The ligament damage was real, and it almost delayed the press tour for Rocky II. Stallone did the press tour anyway, shaking hands with his left, signing autographs with his left, hiding the brace under long sleeves. Nobody in the public knew. The 11 guys in that gym kept their mouths shut for a while. But stories have a way of finding air. They seep through closed doors. They travel from barstool to barstool, from gym to gym, from one old trainer to another old trainer, until they become part of the fabric of a place. And this story became part of the fabric of Gold's Gym, of Venice Beach, of that particular era when Hollywood tough guys were deciding whether they were really tough or just pretending. Here's the truth of it, and I mean the real truth, underneath the punches and the blood and the swollen wrist. This fight was never about boxing versus Aikido. It was never about which martial art was superior. Those debates are for internet forums and drunk uncles at Thanksgiving. This fight was about something else entirely. It was about authenticity. Stallone had spent 3 years being told he was a fraud, an actor playing a fighter, a pretender wearing gloves. Every real boxer, every real martial artist, every real tough guy in Hollywood looked at him and saw a costume. They saw the script, the choreography, the camera angles that made fake punches look real. They saw Rocky and they thought, "Nice movie, kid, but you wouldn't last 10 seconds in a real fight. Seagal walked into that gym carrying every one of those assumptions, and Stallone dismantled them with his fists. Literally. You want to know something? Seagal never talked about this fight publicly. Not once. In 30 years of interviews, 30 years of talking about how Aikido was the supreme martial art, 30 years of claiming he could beat anyone, he never mentioned the Tuesday afternoon in Gold's Gym when a 5'10" actor with a crooked mouth and a bad wrist put him on the mat and made him say enough. And Stallone never talked about it either, not because he was ashamed, not because he was afraid of legal consequences, but because he didn't need to. The 11 men who saw it happen knew the truth, and for Stallone, 11 was enough. Consider this. In the years after that fight, Seagal's career took off. Above the law, hard to kill, under siege. He became an action star himself, playing characters who used Aikido to dispatch villains with effortless grace. In every movie, Aikido was invincible. In every movie, the bad guys grabbed his wrist and got thrown across the room. In every movie, punches were slow and grabs were easy, and the physics of a real fight were politely ignored. Stallone watched those movies. He never commented. He just kept making Rocky sequels, kept training for real, kept showing up at gyms and hitting bags and sparring with guys who could actually fight. There's a moment in Rocky III, the one with Mr. T, where Rocky gets knocked down and Mickey is dying in the locker room and everything is falling apart. Rocky looks at Adrian and says he's afraid, not afraid of Clubber Lang, afraid of himself. Afraid that the guy who fought for his life in the first movie is gone, replaced by the celebrity, the endorser, the guy in the lunchbox. I'll tell you something for free. That scene wasn't entirely acting. Stallone wrote it after the fight with Seagal. He wrote it sitting at his kitchen table with his right wrist in a brace, typing with one hand, channeling the fear that lived in him permanently, the fear that comfort would make him soft, that fame would sand down the edges that made him who he was. The fight in Gold's Gym proved those edges were still sharp. It proved that the kid from Hell's Kitchen who survived foster homes and poverty, and a father who used his fists for the wrong reasons, had not been erased by Hollywood money and magazine covers. But there's one more piece to this story, and it's the piece that makes it a legend instead of just a gym fight. 3 years later, 1982, Stallone was at a charity event in Beverly Hills. Black tie, champagne, the kind of room where everyone is famous and nobody is real. Stallone was standing near the bar when he saw Seagal across the room. They hadn't spoken since the fight. They hadn't crossed paths. 3 years of silence. Stallone watched Seagal work the room, shaking hands, telling stories, making people laugh. Seagal was charming when he wanted to be, and tonight he wanted to be. He was pitching himself to producers, trying to break into the movie business, trying to turn his martial arts credentials into a screen career. Stallone could have avoided him. The room was big enough, but that's not what happened. Stallone walked over. He tapped Seagal on the shoulder. Seagal turned around, and for a half-second his body tensed, muscle memory from the gym. Then he relaxed. "Sly," he said. "Steve," Stallone said. They stood there, 2 large men in tuxedos, both carrying the memory of blood on a gym mat. And then Stallone said something that Seagal later repeated to a close friend, who repeated it to a trainer, who repeated it to me. "You should make movies," Stallone said. "You move well. The camera would love you." Seagal stared at him. This was the man who'd put him on the mat, the man who'd made him say enough. And here he was, at a party, encouraging his career. "You mean that?" Seagal asked. "I don't say things I don't mean," Stallone said. "Talk to my guy at CAA. Tell him I sent you." That was the vulnerability. That was the moment of empathy from a powerful character that nobody saw coming. Stallone had beaten this man physically and decisively, and 3 years later, he helped launch his career. Not out of guilt, not out of obligation, out of something simpler. Respect. The respect you earn when you step onto a mat with no cameras and no choreography, and you put something real on the line. Seagal made his first movie 5 years later. I'm not saying Stallone is the reason. The path from that conversation to Above the Law had many turns, many players, many decisions that had nothing to do with a Tuesday afternoon in Gold's Gym. But the door opened a little wider because of what Stallone said at that bar, and both men knew it. Now, let me land this plane. The story of the fight in Gold's Gym survived because stories about real things always survive. You can lock the door. You can swear 11 men to secrecy. You can pretend it never happened. But the truth has weight. It presses against the walls. It finds the cracks. And eventually it walks out into the daylight and stands there, daring you to look away. Stallone's most dangerous fight didn't happen in a ring with cameras rolling and millions watching. It happened on a rubber mat surrounded by dumbbells and weight benches, witnessed by 11 men who never expected to see what they saw. A movie star who fought for real, a martial artist who learned the limits of theory, and a moment of violence that became, against all odds, a moment of connection. Because here's the final thing. The thing that makes this story matter beyond two guys hitting each other in a gym. Stallone and Seagal weren't enemies before that fight, and they weren't enemies after it. They were two men testing themselves against each other because that's what men do when they need to know the truth about who they are, not who the magazines say they are, not who the audience thinks they are, who they really are, when the door is locked and there's nobody to perform for except the handful of people standing along the walls. Stallone found out he was still the kid who wouldn't quit. Seagal found out he was brave enough to fight and honest enough to stop. And the 11 men who witnessed it found out that legends don't always happen in arenas. Sometimes they happen in a gym in Venice Beach on a Tuesday afternoon, between two men who had every reason to walk away and chose not to. The wrist healed. The nose healed. The bruises faded. But the story stayed. It's still in the walls of that gym. It's still in the memory of the men who were there. And now it's in your ears, carried from that locked room to this moment. Across decades and distance, proof that some fights matter not because of who won, but because both men showed up. Stallone threw the first punch, and it landed wrong. But everything after that landed exactly right.